Assalamu alaikum. And hello, everyone. I'm your host, Hannah Zuberi, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now on Muslim Network Television. You can watch us 24/7 on Samsung Galaxy 19 and Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and soon Apple TV. Today, we're going to be talking about the persecution of the Falun Gong. Falun Dafa, which is also known as Falun Gong, is a spiritual practice that millions around the world have made a part of their lives. Rooted in Buddhist tradition, it consists of two main components: self improvement through the studies of teachings and gentle exercises and meditation. Like many other religious groups in China, Falun Gong, however, has experienced much persecution. The persecution of Falun Gong is the anti-religious campaign initiated in 1999 by the Communist Party of China to eliminate the spiritual practice of Falun Gong in China. And it maintains this as a doctrine of state atheism. It is characterized by a multifaceted propaganda campaign, a program of enforced ideological conversion and re education, reportedly a variety of extra-legal coercive measures such as arbitrary arrests, forced labor, and physical torture, sometimes resulting in death. Much of what we will talk to you about today will remind you of the oppression our Uyghur brothers and sisters are suffering in East Turkestan by the same Chinese Communist Party. So, what has been happening to the Falun Gong is happening to the Uyghurs. And to explore this and much more, to learn more about the practice, to hear what they're going through, we have two experts joining us today. They have much research experience in Falun Gong persecution. They are Eric Meltzer and Ingrid Wu. Ingrid is the vice president and spokeswoman of the Hong Kong Falun Dafa Association, where she liaises with civil society and universities regarding Falun Gong in Hong Kong and the persecution of believers in mainland China. She holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Hong Kong and has worked in finance and media sectors for the past 15 years. Eric Meltzer is a program manager at the Falun Dafa Association of Washington, D.C., where he liaises with the U.S. Congress offices and NGO officials to pass legislation to end the persecution of Falun Dafa in China. Involved in Falun Dafa human rights advocacy work for almost 2 decades, Eric contributed to the passage of several resolutions in the House of Representatives. Thank you so much to the both of you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. It really means so much that that you brought us on the show. Thank you so much, Hannah.
And Ingrid, for joining us from Hong Kong. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you, Hannah. I just unmute my microphone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my experience and our knowledge on the persecution of Falun Dafa. Thank you.
So today I wanted to share with us, and I'll be really honest with you, before I started my human rights work, I was a journalist and I had heard of Falun Gong. I had often seen practitioners in parks, but I had also heard a lot of the propaganda. And until you start doing the work and really researching, it's very easy to fall into that propaganda and think that this is something nefarious. This is something that and that just taught me. It showed me how little I knew until I started working on and researching and writing about the Uyghur cause and learning what the Chinese Communist Party has done to other minorities in Tibet and other places for me to take another look at the Falun Gong. And this was over past several years, of course, that has built. But I'm really, really happy for you guys to be here and to educate our audience on what this practice is. So please share with us What is Falun Gong?
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of a history, a recent history of the practice. So Falun Dafa, it's also known as Falun Gong. The names are interchangeable. It has a very ancient history in China, where it was taught basically privately from a teacher to a student over the ages. And in the early 90s, in 1992, it was basically introduced to the public in a city in northeast China called Changchun, and it really spread by word of mouth, largely because of the health benefits and the moral teachings. So one reason to explain its popularity. So China has 5,000 years. 5,000 years of history, and it's always been rooted in some kind of spirituality. So in mainland China, it's been largely Buddhist or Taoist or Confucian. And so most everyone over China's 5,000 years had some kind of spirituality, some kind of connection with God, with the divine. And when the Chinese Communist Party took over in 1949, through their various persecutions, namely the Cultural Revolution, especially in the 60s and 70s, Chinese lost their connection, their belief in God, and their connection to their spiritual heritage. And so with Falun Gong, it allowed Chinese to reconnect with that ancient heritage, which has been a part of Chinese culture for so many generations. And so it largely spread by word of mouth because of the health benefits. So there are two main aspects of practicing Falun Gong. The first and foremost is improving yourself by living according to the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. So the idea is in your day-to-day life, when you come across tests, when something unpleasant happens to you, try to evaluate it according to truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. And the idea is that these principles are how we become our best selves, and how we can keep digging in and just becoming kinder people, better people, and really getting back to our most our this the best state, the best state, and our connection with heaven, basically. And the other part of it is doing meditative exercises. So there are movements that you are still and enter tranquility, opening energy channels, but they're very slow moving. They look something like a yoga or a Tai Chi, but it's a little bit different, and the movements are a good bit simpler, actually. And so the other thing I wanted to mention about it is that Falun Gong, it is not a formal religion in that there is no hierarchy. In the 20 years I've been involved, I have paid exactly $0 and 0 cents. There's no tithing, and there's no real hierarchy. There's just the person that introduced it, and everyone else is just trying to live according to the principles. So there is very much a deep belief in God, but there isn't the formality. There isn't really like holidays or tithing. It's really just a very personal spiritual thing, and a way to live your life to become more spiritual. And so with this method for Chinese to reconnect with their spiritual heritage, it spread across China, and people from all walks of life in China were coming to practice Falun Gong, where oftentimes they would go to a park, do the exercises, go to work, and maybe in the evening, some people would gather together and study the teachings of the practice. And otherwise, people had a pretty normal life, and people practicing Falun Gong ranged from little kids to doctors to farmers to high-ranking government officials. And so between 1992 and 1998, 1999, roughly 70 to 100 million Chinese were practicing Falun Gong. And that number actually came from a survey that the Chinese government did, because Falun Gong doesn't keep records of membership. It was actually the Chinese government that found that out. Um, and basically, by the late 90s, the leader of the Communist Party, Jiang Zemin, was in the midst of a power struggle where, although he was the head of the government, his power wasn't absolute. And so, like many dictators in history, you pick a scapegoat and you target them for elimination. And it was also out of jealousy because, as you know, in China, they want the number one belief that the government wants you to have is that the government is God, and any kind of belief in actually a real belief in God that isn't the Communist Party, they try to stomp out. And so the persecution began July 20th of 99, so just over 21 years ago. And so overnight, Falun Gong practitioners became the largest group of prisoners of conscience in China today.
Hello, can you
Sorry,
hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Anna?
you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Ingrid, you are a practitioner of Falun Gong. And so, how long have you been practicing it? Is it a part of your family or was it a personal journey for you?
Yeah, actually, I practiced Falun Gong since 1996 when I learned it from my relative who was a scholar in Hong Kong University, and then when I went back to Beijing because I was born in Beijing, and I visited my families in Beijing, I realized that a lot of my family members practice Falun Gong, and because most of them, or in Beijing, for since I was a child, we have a lot of people who practicing different qigong, and I practiced my first qigong when I was just 6 years old. So everyone is practicing different qigong, and then to 1987, I found most of people are practicing Falun Gong, and all of my family members, and also some of my schoolmates, and also some of the my teachers in my schools, they were all practicing Falun Gong, and their feedback was very good. And I also would think it would be good experience. So I got a book from my relative and also read it, and then I realized that my some of my bad experience, like my attachment of jealousy, has been disappeared or vanished in just several months, which make me feel amazing, because simply studying a book, and it makes me feel such peaceful and very good in a good change in inside. It's not something from outside, because when I was born in Beijing, I actually went to Hong Kong since I was 17 years old. So actually, I was educated in Beijing, and I was basically learned a lot of different knowledge from the CCP government, and I tried to stop my ugly thinking or some attachment like jealousy, but I could not do that. I cannot achieve such kind of peaceful level, no matter using what kind of way. It's just from outside, it's not from inside. After I practiced Falun Gong, I felt peaceful is from inside, inner side. So then I decided to really practice Falun Gong, and now I have been practicing for over 23 years, and I benefit from it a lot. not only from the mindset, but also from my body. I felt I became healthier than before. It's really good, and also I see others change. Like my mother also practice after I practiced first, and then she also got very good improvement on her health.
So,
Yeah.
so a lot of times here, especially on television, you may see we see these beautiful dances, the Shen Yu, and it's just this beautiful celebration of dance and Chinese culture. And then, but yet the Chinese embassy calls it, stay away from this cult, and encourages Americans to not take part in um, going to even watch this dance and traditional show. So why is the practice called a cult? Go ahead, Evan.
I can talk about that. Sure. Yeah. So that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. So when one thing that we need to distinguish is that so I'm an American, and um, oftentimes a lot of Americans will feel that I love my country, but I don't always agree with the government. And those can be that's a pretty common view to have with many Americans. But in China, if you don't agree with what the government says, then you're considered an anti-China force. So there's not really that freedom of thought. And so when the persecution of Falun Gong began in '99, pretty much overnight, the public opinion of Chinese changed, and it became a really bad thing. Um, and there were many misconceptions that I can address. So number one, the reason that Falun Gong is really nothing like a cult is that there is no organization, there is no money. The meetups that exist are sometimes in a high school cafeteria or in someone's living room. There is no tithing. There's no relinquishing of your personal identity. Quite the opposite. After I started practicing Falun Gong, my grades in school became better. I became a little bit smarter. Not that you know, I'm not a genius by any stretch, but I got a little bit smarter, and I was a better student, a better friend, a better son, and it really helped me balance my life. And quite the opposite. It didn't. It Falun Gong does not take people away from their families, from their livelihoods, and it really it teaches first and foremost that you should be a good person, you should do well at your job, you should be a good student, you should be a good child, you should take care of your parents, following these Chinese traditions. Um, and there's yeah, and people come and go as they please. It is as free flowing as anything out there. There is there's not really much of an impetus to get people to practice Falun Gong. Were it not for the persecution, probably not many people would even know about it. Like in here in Washington D.C., where I live, people would go and practice the exercises before work, and that'd be it. It's oftentimes it was before anyone even woke up, and you wouldn't even see it that much. But it's because of the persecution that occurred that we have to expose what's happening in China. So it's not an evangelical organization. And it just, yeah, there's really no hierarchy and money. Even if I wanted to give money, there's really nowhere for like me to give money to learn the practice. Everything is for free on the internet. The books are there to download and read for free. The videos that teach the exercises are free. The music that is used for performing the exercises is free. There is nowhere to give any money, and there's no hierarchy. I'm sorry, we don't hear you, Hannah.
So if all these resources are free, then who's funding the resources? How does that come to being? Who develops these resources?
Sure. So I mean, as far as a website, I mean, if you actually look at the Falun Dafa website, it is maintained by volunteers. The actual teachings are just posted as a website or a PDF to download. There's not like a lot of there's not really a lot of maintenance to do. There are people that translate the message into different languages, but it's all on a volunteer basis. There is no money. So the distinction that I'll make is, so talking about Shenyang performing arts. So Shenyang performing arts is, of course, let me introduce what Shenyang actually is. It is a classical Chinese dance and music performance. And it was started by Falun Gong practitioners about 2006, about 15 years ago. And the idea behind it was that there are so many performing arts companies coming from China, but they have to basically pass muster with the government. So they have to include messages that are praising the Communist Party, and they're kind of a mix of classical Chinese dance, modern dance, ballet, and they don't have the spirit of Chinese civilization. And so in ancient China, whether you were a musician, a martial artist, a scholar, it was really emphasized that you have to have inner purity in order to make works that will move people. And so Shen Yun was created by Falun Gong practitioners to bring about a renaissance of classical Chinese music and dance, because there's nowhere else. And so the performance in some small parts does talk about the persecution in China. And so it is dancers, there's a crew that has to travel the world, there is an orchestra that travels. So sure, you have to charge tickets just like any other show. But Shen Yun not is not necessary. It will not necessarily is not the right word, but Shen Yun is not like an arm of Falun Gong. It's it's just like your network, the Muslim network TV that we're on now. It's correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like a direct extension of it's something, an
Every
initiative
Muslim,
that you've done on
yeah,
your own. There's two
exactly.
distinctions. Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
like every Muslim in the world is connected to Muslim Network TV.
yeah.
Exactly. So that makes sense. That there's a separate group of Falun Gong practitioners that run Shenyun, so that it's not like the national arm of the International Society of Falun Gong or something like that. So some say that the reason why this religious persecution against those who practice Falun Dafa started occurring because of China's atheist and the Communist Party's fear that any group that is not in its control, especially one that subscribes to a different ideology, this fear has built up the persecution. Do you have any commentary to offer on how you think that religious persecution developed through the years in the Chinese government?
Sure. So what's interesting about the persecution is that, well, before it began, Falun Gong was actually supported by a great amount of the Chinese government because of its health benefits. There was a Chinese government survey that came up with two main findings. Number one, 70 to 100 million practitioners in China. And second, that practicing Falun Gong saved each person around 1,000 Chinese yuan RMB in medical expenses, and that totals to 100 billion yuan in medical savings for the government. And so there were actually really high-ranking officials who were quite supportive of it because it led to stability, more money for the government, people doing their work better. But when by the late 90s, by 1999, when Jiang Zemin, the Communist Party leader at the time, was looking to crack down on it, it wasn't like the whole of China saw a growing threat from Falun Gong. It's essentially a dictator who needed a scapegoat to go after, to raise his clout. And so as far as the persecution began, it really was out of jealousy. Falun Gong has no political party. There's no political affiliation. Even even in U.S. elections and in politics around the world, there is no guidance on who to vote for. But it's really the Chinese Communist Party just wants to stomp out people's belief in God and with any connection to something more than yourself. Even though high-ranking Communist Party members were practicing Falun Gong. There really wasn't a competition that was going on. It's just that communism is about struggle, and they talk about creating heaven on earth and just destroying connections with the past. And Falun Gong is being truthful and compassionate and tolerant, and it's and you can see the exercises here in Washington D.C. So they were really in stark contrast with each other. Falun Gong has spread around the world. It's practiced in roughly 100 countries, and really is only persecuted in this fashion in mainland China, and it's largely supported by countries, by governments around the world.
Ingrid, do you want to add something to this from your experience, what you've been experiencing in Hong Kong recently?
Well, I should say that theoretically, actually, the CCP itself, it's based on atheism, and also Falun Gong is based on, we believe in truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, which I think for communism, they basically they do not allow such kind of concept, which is different from their concept, their values. And also, during my grow up in Beijing, I really felt that under the CCP's ruling, I could not say the truth. And no matter when I was in schools or when I in my daily life, I simply cannot speak out the truth. For example, in a TV show, we have to watch the TV and keep the same saying if we are publicly express in the publicly. So we have to twist our mind, but practicing Falun Gong is like to, because we have to believe in truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, and we have to practice it. And also, I think this one makes people dare to behave like themselves and tell the truth, which is not bearable by the CCP itself. And also in Hong Kong nowadays, as everybody noticed that the national security law has just implemented in Hong Kong. And a lot of people scared that such kind of law is override. Actually, it is override the current legal system in Hong Kong. So if there is a conflict between this national security law and also current the legal system in Hong Kong, the national security law can override it. So that means no matter if we have our freedom of speech or freedom of belief, we are under a threat of the national security law, which is under the CCP's concept, CCP's value. And some of people, they are under threat, and also some of our practitioners in Falun Gong practitioners also under such kind of threat from the CCP. For example,
So even in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Mm.
Even in Hong Kong, actually, before national security law, we Falun Gong practitioners actually we under the protection of the basic law, we are still having such kind of freedom of belief and freedom of protest, and also exercise freely in Hong Kong. But I should say that since last year, when the extradition law, anti-extradition law movement in Hong Kong, we began to feel such kind of pressure from CCP. Some of our practitioners got attacked by pro-CCP thugs and into bleed. And also in this year, after the national security law has been effect in Hong Kong, 4 of Falun Gong practitioners got arrested by the Hong Kong police when they are spreading posters in some protest district, and then when police arrested them and also charged them like unauthorized assembly, which is never happened before. And also when one of our practitioner, when she refused to sign any documents or change clothes, which she has that kind of right according to the Hong Kong law. One police officer, he said to our practitioners that you didn't sign documents nor changing clothes. We are going to send you to mainland China for organ harvesting. This is really shock, which actually this kind of speech from a police officer, it has never happened before, because if it happened before, I think he will face a big complaint. But it happens after the national security law launched in Hong Kong. And I think basically because
I wanted to ask Eric this, is when we're talking about organ harvesting, this is one of the methodologies that has been used to persecute Falun Gong in mainland China. So let's talk a little about what kind of practices does the government use to diminish the human rights of people who practice Falun Gong in mainland China, which now Ingrid is seeing appearing in Hong Kong, which is truly frightening. What kind of brainwashing occurs in the detainment camps where people are imprisoned and tortured? And so let's talk about that. And then I want to talk a little bit more about the propaganda and what role that plays in keeping these camps from mainstream media coverage.
Sure. Yes, that's a great question. So after the persecution began, well, I should say shortly before, there was essentially a Falun Gong Gestapo that was created called the 610 Office, because it was created on June 10th by Jiang Zemin, party leader at the time. And so the 610 Office is an extrajudicial office, which essentially means that they can abduct Falun Gong practitioners from their homes in the middle of the night. And the 610 Office is really one of the main apparatuses that is used to disappear Falun Gong practitioners. And so, so as far as forms of persecution, that have been employed against Falun Gong practitioners, everything imaginable. From getting sent to jails and labor camps where women are sexually abused and raped. One of the main forms of persecution that's happening that Henna talked about is forced organ harvesting. So China has been doing organ harvesting since the 80s with death row inmates, but the numbers were really small. But after the persecution of Falun Gong began in '99, shortly after, organ transplantation centers started to pop up around China. And Falun Gong practitioners who escaped the clutches of the police had reported that they were given expensive blood tests and organ health tests. And essentially, Falun Gong practitioners, along with Uyghur Muslims in East Turkestan in the Xinjiang region, are being killed for quick organ transplants in China, and so with Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs, we're at a really distinct disadvantage. So from some things that I think that we can share in common are, first is that healthy lifestyles. So Falun Gong practitioners don't drink or smoke and are healthy meditators. So that's the first thing. The second is that when Falun Gong practitioners are arrested, oftentimes they don't want to tell the police their names or where they're from because it could lead to their families being persecuted. So so a healthy individual who is off the grid is disappeared, and they're a main target for this. So what is unique about the persecution of Falun Gong is how many independent investigations have been done into the persecution. There was
And this is
yeah.
such a fascinating, this is something that you're mentioning. This is, the ties are so, the parallels are so vivid to me, because this is the same for the Muslim population as well. The no alcohol, eating healthy, family ties, spirituality, worshiping. This is all the themes are very common. And so and so this is, uh, have what sort of, so when, I wanted to touch on organ harvesting a lot, because this has been going on for the Falun Gong a lot, for a long time, and you have some resolutions in Congress on this as well. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So, so in the House of Representatives, we've had 5 resolutions passed over the years. That depending on the year, some of them mention organ harvesting once we learned about it. But we've had 5 resolutions passed over the years in the House. We currently have a resolution in the Senate that is pending. That's, I believe, Senate Resolution 274, I believe. But yeah, the number of Falun Gong practitioners that have been killed for their organs, it's really hard to say. But according to an independent investigation that was done by 2 Canadians, one was a human rights lawyer, another was a former Secretary of State for Asia Pacific, and an investigative journalist, who are not Falun Gong practitioners. They estimate that the number right, estimating roughly that at least 100,000 Falun Gong practitioners are killed a year for their organs. So this is really part of the directive from Jiang Zemin to destroy Falun Gong practitioners physically, bankrupt them, and ruin their reputations. And so this is really a carrying out of the directive from Jiang Zemin. I'm sorry, I don't hear you.
So this, under Jiang Zemin, he was a Communist Party leader, for those of our audience who may not know who he is, and he shaped the religious persecution campaign around Falun Gong. So how did his ideologies of banning the practice somehow connect to mobilizing the country? And what tactics were used to push this religious persecution forward? Because in order for an entire country to fall into this campaign, so it's not just by the government, Um, please explain that to us, because a lot of times that's not, people can understand, okay, the government is persecuting this certain select group of people, but for an entire society to buy into that, it takes much more work. So
yes, most certainly. So it's largely tied to the fact that in China, if the government says you're bad, you must be bad. There isn't that independent thought where you can think, I love my country, but I don't agree with the government always does. There's been so much indoctrination over the years where for many Chinese, the Chinese Communist Party is China and there's no separation. So the party is always correct. What the CCP says, we will go along with. And of course, there were quite a few examples that really made a big impact on Chinese. So one of the main ways that the CCP was able to create a lot of anger against Falun Gong on Tiananmen Square in 2001. There were some people that set themselves on fire, a self-immolation, and to be very clear, Falun Gong prohibits killing, killing of yourself, killing of others. If you step on an ant on the ground, okay, but any like truly like taking of life is completely it is not allowed. It is completely in against the teachings of the practice. And so there was actually a lot of rather strange things that happened around this incident. First off, Western media were not allowed to go there. They were blocked from Tiananmen Square when it happened. The security cameras were positioned in a whole multitude of security cameras were positioned on the right spot, right when it was happening. And the actual reports in China, people that were actually in the hospitals that had really severe burns were just out in the open in a regular hospital room, and you don't treat someone who has incredibly severe burns. You don't just leave them in a non-sterile room. And it was actually the United Nations. We presented our findings to the UN, and they basically came to us and said, yes, this is absolutely a fictitious thing. It is not something that Falun Gong practitioners would have done, and it was absolutely something that was coordinated by the Chinese government. So whenever I meet Chinese people face to face, this is actually the first thing that I talk to them about, because this is really one of the big defining things that people from China think, oh, Falun Gong practitioners commit suicide, set fire, are causing disturbances. Other things that are really can shape it is a misconception of Falun Gong practitioners like not taking care of their health. Another thing. So one of the main forms of propaganda was that, oh, Falun Gong practitioners don't go to hospitals, they don't take medicine. I can tell you personally, not the case. Not the case. I get my annual checkup. I make sure I'm in good health. I do what my doctor says.
Ingrid, can we get your take on that? Because you've observed it in your family, and when was the point where they accepted this practice, and when was the point where you saw your neighbors or others turn against the practice?
Well, in 1999, when I went to Beijing for a visit with my families, it was in July, just when the crackdown happened in Beijing. And let me tell you my experience on that period. Actually, on the street in Beijing at that time, on the street, several meters, there is a loudspeaker, and the loudspeaker repeatedly making the propaganda and against Falun Gong. And then this one, if I go to shopping, I would just step out, since I step out from my home and then to the shop, and then come back. I continuously listening to
Oh,
such kind
wow.
of propaganda, and it's like brainwash. And also in my at home, when I was at home, almost every TV program is playing such kind of propaganda and saying Falun Gong is not is a cult and something like that. It's just every program. It's brainwash. So
Mm,
and then it's actually it's like a pressure, and such kind of pressure makes everybody very nervous,
mm,
and they felt uneasy. For example, I have my two very close friends in my when I was in Beijing. Um, I mean, my classmates in Beijing, and they were two of my very close friends. And I also sent two books to them, and to let them to read. But later, when I went to Beijing, they gave it back to me and saying that they are afraid of practicing Falun Gong,
mm,
and they said you should not touch it. And also, when I tried to explain what happened truly in Falun Gong, or what exactly happened in Tiananmen Square about the self-flammation, which is fake, I showed them like a video analysis. Um, One of my good friend, she stepped away. She refused to watch it,
mm,
and she stepped away and saying, and then I asked her what happened, and she said, I I do not want to choose um, from you or my husband.
mm,
And, and then I realized that her husband is in charge of persecution on Falun Gong in 610 organization,
mm,
which is like a Gestapo um, uh, organization in Nazi, which is override the legal system in China. Um, so this kind of experience that actually happened just around us, and some of practitioners I know, uh, for example, one of my teacher in my when I was in middle school in mainland China, she was sentenced to 10, 10 years. Um, I mean, charged in 10-year sentences, and all her families felt a high pressure, and asked her to give up on her belief,
mm,
because their families also face a lot of pressure from the CCP. So the CCP actually asked their families to give pressure on Falun Gong practitioners as well. So the influence is not only the practitioners, but also their families as well.
So, as we're wrapping up the hour, we have a few minutes left. I wanted to ask you, what can human rights organizations, what can lay people who are concerned about this as they hear this, and so it's so easy for the CCP to tar and feather the Uyghurs as terrorists and Falun Gong as cultists. And, so these are people who are anti state and therefore need to be wiped out. What can be done? Um, Number one, like why is there not more mainstream media attention on this? And what can people do to spread more awareness and actually do something for practitioners of faith in China? Yes, go
So
ahead.
I can talk about this. Yes. So after the persecution began, so the full might of the CCP's propaganda machine was vilifying Falun Gong, and it was sadly it achieved a certain degree of success, and there wasn't a lot that Falun Gong practitioners at the time could do, because there's no central organization. It's largely people showing up to meditate, and there's no hierarchy, organizational structure, and so it's taken us a lot of time, a lot of media outreach and public awareness to educate people about what's going on. But like when Ingrid was talking about, there was propaganda being blared over the loudspeakers. Same thing happening in the West, where news agencies in the West get actually use footage and content that comes from China Central Television, the state's official propaganda department, and they were just broadcasting those without really knowing what they're doing. Oh, you know, China's a big country, big government, and we have financial ties with them, and they just believed the lies of the CCP, unfortunately, and there just wasn't anything in place on the Falun Gong side to counterbalance that. And so, but over the years, we've really been able to turn the tide, and we've been able to get quite a bit of support. So last month, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo actually published a statement that was condemning 21 years of persecution and calling it for it to end. Never has a Secretary of State made such a declaration before. And there's I think there's also been a lot of encouragement here in Washington, where the U.S. government is imposing sanctions on persecutors of Uyghurs and Falun Gong practitioners, and so really the best way. There are two ways that are really effective to counter this persecution. First is just to take a few moments to actually learn that this is something that's persecuted. With Falun Gong practitioners, the main thing that is of importance to us is not for actually getting people to come practice. It's just understand that this is a peaceful meditation that is being persecuted for having a belief in God. And so you can see this is the statement here from Secretary Pompeo. But really, just knowing yourself and telling your friends and telling your family, just, hey, if you can take 5 minutes out of your day to read something, the website that I would refer people to is called faluninfo.net, FALUN info.net. That's the Falun Dafa Information Center. And we also do have a resolution that is circulating in the U.S. Senate, Senate Resolution 274, and yeah, if you feel compelled to call your senator, if you're in the U.S., and tell them, please co-sponsor Senate Resolution 274, and encourage your senator to have it voted on and passed, because with these resolutions, although they're resolutions and not technically binding legislation, the police in China, when they learn about the U.S. government and people around the world shining a spotlight on the atrocities they're doing, it restrains them. It makes them afraid, because many of these Chinese officials have money and family here in the States. And it makes them fearful, and it restrains persecution, and it shows that the world is watching. So that would really be the big thing. So.
Thank you
Um,
so much. Yes, go ahead, Ingrid.
Yes. In Hong Kong, I have something to share with others about the media, why that those media keep silence for over 20 years. In Hong Kong, we have several big broadcast or TV station, and they have sometimes, when you watch the TV, if the background have the Falun Gong protest, they blur the background and they blur the banners, and and also sometimes we received some of the screenshots from the journalist of those TV program. They said to others that stop, be aware of any background showing Falun Gong protest or Falun Gong banners or Falun Gong practitioners or the yellow T-shirts, because if your TV has such kind of background, your TV will be stopped distributing in mainland China, and also your permission of interview in mainland China will be influenced. Such kind of information we received quite a lot for the past 2 decades.
Thank you so much to both of you for being here and being on this show. And for all our audience here, we're ran out of time, but thank you so much for learning about this. Do go visit the website and learn about the persecuted Falun Gong practitioners in China. We hope you can join us again tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.